Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Here we are in Oklahoma City, continuing our conversations. Dr. Gitender Goyal with Our Way Health and myself. And these stories we're having coverage over at priceofbusiness.com and usdailyreview.com. And plus, of course, we're going to rebroadcast them on Business Talk 1110 a.m. We've had some great speakers and a great time, and we continue to enjoy our interviews. And Dr. Goyal, why don't you introduce our guest this segment?
Oh, you're probably the best person to introduce our guest, but I'm so excited to have Jeff Dice here. And I really enjoyed the talk last night, how to vote in November. I feel more educated. I want to go tell my friends back in town about what we talked. Okay. And thank you for joining us here and sharing some thoughts with us here.
Yeah,
but you take the introduction more.
Okay, so the Mises Institute is with Jeff Dice is with, and it's an amazing organization. It's inspired by Ludwig von Mises, founded by Murray Rothbard and others, and has a very strong emphasis in the Austrian School of Economics. And any regular listener of my program knows my passion about Austrian economics. And obviously, you have the same thing, or you'd be working somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of give us an overview, a panoramic overview of what the Austrian view is.
Well, Austrian economics is really just a term of convenience because some of the seminal economists in this area happen to hail from Austria. So it doesn't necessarily imply a certain worldview or a certain set of principles. There are some general principles that are shared by most people who call themselves Austrians. But it's really a different way of looking at economics, a different way of looking at the world. Most economics today, what we like to call mainstream economics, is somewhat loosely based around the work of John Maynard Keynes, who created his famous book in the Keynesian Revolution in the 1930s, sort of in the midst of the Great Depression. And if we had to summarize Keynesianism, it's that, government or central banks ought to stimulate the economy to create demand, that the key to economic prosperity is to impel people to buy, either through fiscal policy or monetary policy or regulatory policy, whatever it might be. The Austrian school takes a very different approach and says, the real growth comes from capital accumulation, and that the methodology, the way we ought to look at economics is not in aggregates and groups and trying to create demand, but rather we ought to look at the individual. Right. We ought to judge human action and understand economics as human action and really judge it and base it on the individual. So from the Austrian school perspective and from this methodological perspective came a sort of a general appreciation for free markets, for capitalism over socialism, for no central planning in economic policy or monetary policy. So the two ways I would say that Austrian economics really differs in viewpoint from most modern free market economics is in methodology, in a strict, rigorous individual perspective in terms of economic method, and also when it comes to money and banking. The Austrian school is really the only economic school of thought today that says money ought to be a commodity created and generated. Because it represents
commodity, right?
That it ought to be generated by the marketplace, that we don't need central banks and we don't need treasury departments to create dollars or to create money, that the marketplace would create private money. It might take the form of gold or silver. It might take the form of a cryptocurrency. It might take several forms. There might be lots of different kinds of payments. But when you give control over money to governments and central banks, they tend to do things that manipulate, that make us all poorer and worse off in the long run.
Yeah. And in fact, in spite of the fact that the government essentially has a monopoly on currency, we have Bitcoin. We have things like iTax, trading systems and things like that. It just shows you can only imagine what it would be like if we had a real free market competitive entity versus what we have with the Fed. Money is not a government entity. It is a market entity. The market should be the driver of that type of thing. You have a question?
Absolutely. This is all fascinating information for me, and it's really learning and bringing this information into healthcare. And that's where I guess we are all here over this weekend. So, Jeff, tell me, how did you get involved with FMMA? And how long have you known Dr. Keith Smith? And I'm guessing...
Well, through Keith Smith, he's become a friend. He's a longtime supporter of the Mises Institute. But I've learned a lot from him about the actual practice of medicine, what doctors go through. I'm learning a lot this weekend about what insurance companies go through and pharmaceutical companies go through. But really, there's this misconception that because healthcare is so important and so vital to human well-being, that we shouldn't have this cruel, greedy marketplace governing healthcare, and it ought to be free. Well, the problem with this perspective is that healthcare has to be provided by somebody. That means doctors and nurses and nurse practitioners have to train many years, give up many years of their lives to develop their skills. Pharmaceutical companies have to spend sometimes billions of dollars and go through lengthy trials to develop drugs. So the provision of medical services is not free. So when we expect it for free, what we're really saying, in effect, is that other people should be slaves to us.
Right.
And there's lots of things that are vital to human flourishing, like food and shelter. We don't yet, anyway, in this country, say that those things ought to be free to all, or at least most people don't. I guess pure socialists do. So the fact that something's valuable, to me, actually creates a stronger argument that it should be left up to the efficiency of the marketplace. Because if there's one thing we know from the Industrial Revolution, from moving people out of agrarian living into towns and factories, is that we've had 200 years of the greatest increases in material prosperity in human history.
Yeah.
And that's basically capitalism, the accumulation of capital and the deployment of that capital into making us all more productive in what we do. And so I absolutely believe that healthcare, it's precisely because healthcare is so vital and so important that it needs to be left to the free market. And there's no question in my mind that the healthcare system we have, which is this sort of unholy patchwork of quasi-private insurance companies, but we can't really call them private because they're mandated by government. So we have this sort of cronyist capitalist alliance going on, and what we're getting is the worst of all worlds, and we need to get back to market principles in medicine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Make sure you check out Jeff over there at Mises.org, MISES.org, an amazing website, incredible number of books available just to your entertainment value and so much more. I can't tell you how many of your books are read. And so just amazing what the resources there. To learn more about it, Dr. Goyal, OurWayHealth.com. He's really a leader in what's happening in the free market movement. I'm Kevin Price. The show continues 24/7 at priceofbusiness.com. Welcome back on our ongoing series here in Oklahoma City at the Free Market Medical Association. And we've been having a fantastic time. Dr. Gitender Goyal and myself, Dr. Goyal, and he's with OurWayHealth.com. He's a leader in this battle here to help restore free market thinking when it comes to the medical front. And of course, the Price of Business, Business Talk 1110 a.m. and USDailyReview.com. Having a great time. We're geeking out with Jeff Dice. He's with Mises.org, MISES.org. In a previous segment, we talked a little bit about the philosophical foundations behind the worldview, both of this event and behind free market economics, or one of the major views. And what's interesting about the Austrian school is that it really is heavily based on morality versus just pure effectiveness or efficacy. And I think that's a really crucial concept, is this idea, is the death of theft, recognizing theft for what it is, be it through monetary manipulation by destroying wealth $1 at a time, right, or government taking from one to giving it to others. Talk about how important that argument is and why that argument is not emphasized enough when it comes to economic debate.
Well, a lot of people look at economics in purely utilitarian fashion. They say sort of what's the best for the greatest number of people. Right. But when Murray Rothbard came along, wrote a book called The Ethics of Liberty, he really laid out the case to say that there's a moral dimension to laissez-faire, and that capitalism and allowing people to engage in business freely isn't just a practical utilitarian thing. It's a very human thing. It comports with natural law, with what's innately human. And I think that's very important to not allow economics to be divorced from all of human action, which includes morality and religion and ethics. Economics is part of that. It's part of human action.
Yeah, very good.
Absolutely.
Good question, Gita?
So, Jeff, you have seen what free market is doing. You have interacted with a lot of, physicians, vendors, employers here, and I call this system a shadow system, right? And we had Kevin threw a line yesterday. This shadow system is trying to take over the shady system. And
Okay.
but I want to hear from you. How do you see things playing out? With the current political environment, how do you see and the insurance companies pulling out of the exchanges?
Mm-hmm.
How do you see this healthcare environment shaping now that you've seen the shadow healthcare system and see kind of what's happening in the mainstream medicine?
I think it was almost planned by the architects of Obamacare. Some of the big insurers like Aetna are now pulling out of some of the exchanges where they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars. I think this is going to create unhappiness and unpleasantness for a lot of insured folks, and it might create the political impetus for a so-called single-payer system, which is basically Uncle Sam takes your taxes and then doles it out to provide health care. I think a single-payer system is in many ways worse than even worse than the mixed system we've got. So I fear a single-payer system, but I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic from what I've heard this weekend, because I think this shadow system that you described, as deductibles get higher, as prices get more and more out of control, as cronyism becomes more and more apparent, I think it's going to be free market doctors operating under the radar. And let's pray that doesn't mean black markets and agorism. Let's hope that they're allowed to do so. But
I don't want my MRI at the vet.
Right, but I think that the people at this conference this weekend are going to lead that revolution. I think it has to come. I think the math just doesn't add up otherwise.
And by the way, in Canada, humans are going to the vet for MRIs. No, I'm serious. It's real. I've interviewed doctors
to not wait.
You can wait for 2 years, or you can go to your veterinarian. And then, so you're standing between a Chihuahua and a German Shepherd in a line. I mean, it's insane what it could lead to. It's really almost like a dystopia. It is like a dystopia when you think about it. You talked about the election, and I get kind of frustrated. I'm getting to that point where I'm getting to the acceptance point of the reality that we're dealing with, and I really loved your thoughts about the frustration. And I'm sure you're familiar with Eric Hoffer's book, The True Believer. We live now in a culture where the true believer is taking over. People who have given up on their own personal success and are trying to drive cultures in a particular way, really to accommodate their narcissistic own agendas and to have themselves taken care of. And so I love what you said about the idea that if people are really successful individually and take care of themselves individually, they're really not going to be caring about what others do, what others are going to be about. But I wanted you to talk just a little bit shortly about the election and what's a modest expectation or a healthy way of looking at it for those who gravitate towards a free market view.
Well, I think first and foremost, I think we should disabuse ourselves of this idea that democracy creates some compromise outcome between a far left and a far right, and voters give us something in the middle, and we should just be happy with that. We shouldn't be happy with that. If it's unconstitutional or worse, we shouldn't just accept the fact that a huge percentage of the people in this country, regardless of whether Hillary wins or Trump wins, are going to be governed by someone they hate. This outcome seems bizarre to me, and it seems to me to tell us that the idea of governing 320 million people from Washington, D.C., people with hugely diverse interests geographically, financially, culturally, economically, in every way, it's not working, and it's not going to work, and we need to get back to a more local perspective on how we govern ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love what you wrote about. What you spoke about Hoppy's, book about democracy, the false god. He has another monograph that's at your website. It's From Aristocracy to Monarchy to Democracy. That is a real, if you want to be sold on reading the larger book, read that first. I've read both, and frankly, he gets the point done very well in that monograph. But it sums it up nicely. Part of the reason, and I find it ironic that Jefferson, who probably had the most libertarian worldview of any president, ended up overseeing the Louisiana Purchase, which created the unwieldy governance that we have, today. It's kind of interesting when you think about it, because one of Hoppy's points is that geography is a driver of bigger government. The bigger the geography, the bigger the need for government. And so it's an interesting concept. I encourage people to read both of those books. Dr. Goyal?
I have several friends who, in this election year, are basically caught in, who to vote for, right? And like you said, I believe that we shouldn't be voting out of, okay, I do not like this candidate, so I'm going to vote for the other one. I think that's a kind of wrong approach to take. But, with the two-party system, it's hard to do anything else. So tell me your thoughts on how the third party, the Libertarian Party,
Right.
fits into this, and somebody like me who probably aligns with the third party more. Should I be voting for the third party, or should I be picking, lesser of the two evils?
Well, I don't believe in lesser of evils voting, because look where it's gotten us.
Yeah.
People have said that year after year, decade after decade. Third parties have a really tough time in the U.S. because we don't have a parliamentary system. Basically, the Constitution says that the House, U.S. House, and the U.S. Senate can operate under the rules that they create. That's basically all guidance it has. And what they've done is they've created a system of patronage and spoils, whereby whichever party has the majority, they control all the committees and basically all the legislation that goes through Congress. So there's nothing about two parties in the Constitution. In fact, many of the founding fathers, the Federalist Papers, warned against political parties. They wanted things done on an issue-by-issue basis, and they wanted loyalty to be to the colonies or to the then burgeoning U.S., not to a political party, and yet here we are today. So I think voting third party as a protest is perfectly wise, and I support it. I don't know whether I personally would support Gary Johnson or Jill Stein in this election because I'm not enamored of either, but I like the idea of third party voting.
Yeah, there you go. And Federalist paper number 10, Madison argued that there should essentially be no parties, in direct opposition to the anti-Federalist number 10, which argues that competition is good in all things, but we created a political system where really it's essentially a biopoly, two parties. And that took some work. Washington ran uncontested for 2 elections, and so thank God, I guess, Adams came along because that guy begged for competition. So great conversation. Obviously, we could geek out with you for hours. We're very grateful you could take some time to be with us. Final thoughts for the viewer and listener out there.
Well, you hear this term abused, right? Everyday heroes.
Yeah.
But I really think that some of the doctors and physicians and nurses and practitioners who are at this event are everyday heroes because they're giving up a lot of their lifetime and energy, and they're giving up a lot of potential income to not just be another cog in the system and to try to get medicine, that most important service to all of us, back to some sort of rational free market principle. So I really applaud Keith Smith and the heroic doctors involved in this group.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, you can learn more about Jeff's great work at Mises.org, MISES.org. Incredible selection of free books that you can access. Great courses that you should look into as well. And of course, Dr. Gitender Goyal, as I've said many times before, OurWayHealth.com. He has a very innovative practice in the Houston area, but he's really a thought leader on what's going on in the whole free market space. I want to remind you the show continues 24/7 at priceofbusiness.com, and this show appears nationally at usdailyreview.com.